You live to Chris Bowen. He's the Climate Change Minister, of course. He is locked in negotiations with the Greens at the moment about legislation that will be introduced tomorrow on that 43% reduction in emissions by 2030. Is there a floor or a ceiling?
Gas and coal projects.
Well, in relation to the first part of your question, no parliament can bind a future parliament is my first point. My second point is no Dutton government will be good for climate, regardless of what any piece of legislation says. If you want a government that's good for climate, keep re-electing the Albanese government. That's the message. Mr Dutton has made it crystal clear he's not got the memo from the Australian people. He's continuing on like the same old Liberal Party. Hasn't learned a thing. Like it's 2013 all over again. You can change the leader and the face. The modern Liberal Party is a party of denial and delay. That continues, and it would continue in the unlikely and unfortunate event of a Dutton government. In relation to discussions with the Greens, those discussions have occurred, and no doubt there'll be some further discussions, but they have occurred along the basis of our public position and, to be fair, the Greens' public position. I'm not going to go into the details, but they would reflect the positions we've reflected publicly. Phil, you've been very patient.
That's right. With regard to the Greens' demand on coal and gas, new coal and gas developments, you've suggested last week about the safeguard mechanism being adequate to keep those under control. But would coal and gas developments be exempt under the safeguards mechanism because they're emissions intensive trade exposures? Sort of Pat Conroy suggested during the election campaign. How do they actually?
Well, Phil, the position on the safeguards mechanism is crystal clear. We're not changing the threshold of firms or facilities that get impacted, but any new facility which goes over 100,000 tonnes would be impacted. I'll be having more to say about the design of the safeguard mechanism in coming weeks, and me consulting about some particular elements about the design of our reforms to the safeguard mechanism, as you'd expect, because it's a complicated undertaking. It will play an important role in emissions reduction. It currently covers the 215 biggest emitters. That's why we took to the election a policy to deal with it and reform it and improve it, sought a mandate and received it. Pablo.
Mr Bowen, just firstly, with your discussions yesterday with Alok Sharma, did he express to you that he'd like to see a more ambitious target on 2030 from the Australian government? And secondly, on 2030 and the Paris Agreement, what hope do you have globally when we see the EU classing gas as green? The Biden administration can't get its climate legislation through Congress, and scientists say they're not going to be able to reach their 2030 target.
I had a great meeting with Alok Sharma yesterday. Actually drove into Parliament House after the meeting in my electric vehicle, which we enjoyed very much. We had a warm discussion about the new government's agenda. He welcomed the new government's agenda. We talked about the international situation, and no, he did not ask. He understood the government's position on 2030 targets and did not advocate any change to that. In relation to the international situation, Pablo, it's a fair question. But a couple of points. The situation in Europe, which I've talked about ad nauseum in this room and other places, is a reminder of the need to manage the transition to renewable energy very well and carefully. And the Australian transition, or transformation as I prefer to call it, should occur more quickly and in a more orderly fashion than it has over the last decade. It's been too slow and too chaotic. And what you're seeing in Europe is too much reliance on one particular supplier of fuel and one particular type of fuel. In Australia's case, there's no geopolitical crisis which will interfere with the supply of sunshine to our landmass or the flow of wind on and off our shores. Good renewable energy policy is good energy security policy with the right storage, with the right transmission.